The night it happened started with something so small it should have meant nothing, but somehow it turned into the moment my entire life cracked open. I remember standing in my own kitchen, holding a tray of drinks I paid for with my own money, while my mother looked at me like I was hired help she could correct in front of strangers. My brother laughed under his breath when a guest asked me where the rest of the staff was, and no one corrected him, not even my father sitting 3 feet away. I was supposed to be the host of this dinner in my own house, yet I felt like I didn't exist inside it. Before I tell you what happened that night and how everything collapsed, if this story resonates with you, please take a moment to like and subscribe, only if this story truly speaks to your heart, and leave a comment telling me where you are watching from right now, and Rini where sate, and Rini dot, your city or country. And what time it is there. I read every single one. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old, and this is the night everything in my family changed forever, even though none of them realized it yet. It all started years earlier, in what I thought was a normal life, in what I thought was my home, but now I understand I was only ever allowed to live there under conditions I never agreed to. That night was supposed to be simple, just a family dinner, guests arriving at 7 p.m., lights warm, food ready, everything perfect on the surface. But from the moment the first guest walked through the door, something felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. My mother immediately placed me in motion, not as a daughter, but as someone expected to serve, correcting the way I spoke, the way I stood, even the way I carried plates. I told myself it was just stress, just her way, just how she always was, but then I heard it, a guest quietly asking if I worked there. And instead of correcting them, my own family said nothing. That silence did more damage than any words could have. I remember my hands tightening around the edge of the tray, feeling heat rise in my chest, not anger yet, something heavier, something like realization I wasn't supposed to question my place in that house. Then came the moment that changed everything, a simple question from someone I had never met before, someone who didn't know the rules my family had built around me, someone who looked at me and saw something no one in my own home would ever admit. Why is she serving everyone like this? And in that second, the room stopped breathing. My mother froze mid-sentence, my brother stopped smiling, and every guest slowly turned their attention toward me as if seeing me for the first time. I didn't know it yet, but that question was about to pull something into the light my family had spent years keeping buried, something they thought would never come out. But to understand why that moment mattered so much, you have to understand what led me here, and what they never told anyone about me, not even the people sitting at that table. Growing up, I did not realize that the way my family treated me was not normal, because it happened so quietly, so consistently, that I thought it was just how families worked. In the Carter household, my brother Daniel was always introduced as the successful one, the one who made people proud, while I was introduced with phrases like "she helps around" or "she is just here." I remember being 12 years old and setting the dinner table every Sunday while my mother corrected the placement of every fork and glass, never because I did it wrong, but because she wanted control over the room I was standing in. My father rarely spoke to me directly unless it was to ask me to move something, fix something, or stay out of the way when important conversations were happening. There was one Christmas where Daniel received a new laptop, a watch, and a trip planned to Florida, while I was given a simple envelope with stored discount coupons and told it was practical for someone like me. I smiled that day because I learned early that reacting only made things worse. Even in school, I felt the difference. My parents attended every event Daniel participated in, sitting in the front row, clapping loudly as if he had already achieved something extraordinary just by showing up. When I received an award for academic excellence in high school, they arrived late, stood at the back for the last 5 minutes, and left before I could even approach them. My mother once told a relative at a family gathering that I was good with routine tasks, the kind of child who does not require much attention, and I remember standing near the kitchen doorway hearing it as if I were not even part of the conversation. Over time, I began to understand the role I was assigned in my own home, not as a daughter to be celebrated, but as someone to maintain order quietly in the background. I started cooking more, cleaning more, organizing events, always told that I was being helpful, but never included in decisions that shaped the family itself. Even the house I lived in never felt like mine. My room was always referred to as temporary, my things always placed where they would not interfere with guests, my presence always adjusted depending on who was visiting. I stopped asking questions because the answers never changed anything. Instead, I learned to observe. I noticed how my brother's mistakes were overlooked, how my efforts were expected, and how my silence was preferred. Years passed like this, slow and repetitive, until adulthood did not feel like a transition but simply an extension of the same invisible role I had always played. That is why, on the night of the dinner, when I was asked to serve guests in my own home without being acknowledged as anything more, something inside me did not break immediately, but shifted quietly. Like a door that had been closed for too long, finally beginning to unlock. I did not know it yet, but that shift was the first sign that the version of my life I had accepted for decades was about to change in a way none of them saw coming. What I did not understand at the time was that silence in my family was never neutral, it was strategic, and that night at the dinner, while I was moving between rooms, serving guests in my own home, something was already being written behind my back that I had not seen yet. It started earlier that day, in a private group message I was never meant to see, where my mother sent a short text to my brother Daniel and my aunt that read, "Do not refer to Emily as the homeowner tonight. It will confuse the guests. She is just helping with hosting duties. We do not want awkward questions." I only saw that message later, but its effect had already spread like a quiet poison through the room. My brother replied with a laughing emoji and said it will be easier if everyone just assumes she is coordinating things for us. She always likes being useful anyway. No one corrected him. No one questioned it. That single thread of conversation became the version of reality everyone accepted before the first guest even arrived. By the time people started walking through the front door, the story had already been decided without me. I remember one of my mother's friends arriving early, looking around the house and asking me casually where I was assigned to place the coats, as if I had been hired for the evening. My mother immediately stepped in and said yes. She has everything under control. She is very good at this kind of thing. She did not say I lived there. She did not say it was my house. She simply reinforced the version of me that required the least explanation. As more guests arrived, I noticed the pattern repeating itself, introductions that skipped over me, conversations that redirected away from my presence, and small corrections whenever I came too close to being acknowledged. At one point, I overheard my aunt telling someone that I was staying temporarily while helping my family organize a dinner for friends, and I froze because I had never said that. I had never agreed to that version of my life, yet somehow it was being spoken as fact. The most painful part was not the lie itself, but how easily it traveled. No one questioned it because it fit too comfortably with everything they already believed about me. Later, while I was in the kitchen preparing more drinks, my phone buzzed with another message, this time from my brother. A screenshot of what looked like a conversation between him and my mother discussing how I had agreed to help manage the evening because I enjoy organizing events for the family. There was even a fabricated note attached, printed and photographed, as if I had volunteered for a role I never accepted. I stood there staring at that image, realizing that in their version of reality, I had already been reassigned, redefined, and quietly removed from my own identity without a single conversation. When I returned to the dining area, I could feel it in the way people looked at me differently, not with hostility, but with misunderstanding that had been carefully installed. And then the moment came that broke whatever fragile balance was left, when a guest turned to my mother and asked again, more directly this time, if I was employed by the household or part of the family, and instead of correcting it, my mother hesitated just long enough for doubt to become certainty in the room. That was when I realized the truth was no longer something I could explain, because by then, it had already been decided for me, and as I stood there holding a tray I did not need to hold, watching my own life be rewritten in real time, I understood that something in this night had crossed a point of no return, and everything I thought I knew about my place in this house was about to collapse completely. After that night, nothing in my family stayed the same. but not in the way people would expect, because instead of confronting the truth, they tried to erase it. The first thing that happened was the phone calls. My mother called me 7 times in 1 hour, each call shorter than the last, until they stopped altogether and were replaced with a single message saying, "We need to talk privately. Do not make this a scene." My brother sent me an email titled "Misunderstanding," writing that things got confused during the dinner, and I should just go along with what was said so the guests would not get uncomfortable. There was no apology, only correction, as if my reality was the problem that needed fixing. I did not respond at first. I sat in my car outside the house that night, still parked in my own driveway, reading those messages over and over, watching my name get rewritten by people who refused to see me clearly. The next morning, I received a letter slid under my front door, handwritten by my mother, saying she was sorry if I felt excluded, but I needed to understand my role in the family dynamic and not create unnecessary tension over a dinner misunderstanding. She ended it by asking me to come over for Sunday dinner so we could reset expectations. I remember holding that letter for a long time, noticing how carefully she avoided the truth, how even in apology she still positioned me as the problem. Over the next few days, more attempts came, each one more distant than the last. My aunt sending a message saying, "Family is complicated," my father calling once without speaking for several seconds before hanging up, as if even his silence had become a message. But the most painful moment came when I tried to return to the house to collect something I had left behind, and I saw through the window that the dining room had already been reset, the table cleaned, the chairs rearranged, as if the entire night had been archived and edited out of existence. When I knocked, my mother opened the door just slightly, not letting me fully enter, and told me now is not a good time. We are trying to move forward from confusion. She did not invite me in. She did not ask how I felt. She simply closed the conversation like a door. After that, I stopped trying to explain. I stopped sending messages. I stopped waiting for someone in my family to finally acknowledge what had happened, because I realized they were not confused. They were committed to their version of me, and no amount of truth would change it. The final shift came quietly, a few days later, when I deleted the message threads, stopped checking my phone for apologies that would never arrive, and sat alone in my house for the first time not as someone waiting to be understood, but as someone finally realizing she might never be. And in that silence, something inside me changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely, because I was no longer asking to be seen. I was beginning to decide what would happen next without them. In the weeks after I stopped waiting for my family to come back to me, my life did not fall apart like I once feared. Instead, it began to quietly rebuild itself in a way I did not recognize at first. The silence they left behind became something I filled with work, structure, and distance. I started waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because the emptiness of the morning felt less heavy than the memories of trying to be seen by people who refused to look at me. I focused on my career, not as an escape, but as something I could finally control without permission from anyone else. At work, I was no longer Emily the daughter who was misunderstood. I was Emily Carter, the operations coordinator, the name printed clearly on my identification badge, the name people actually used when they spoke to me. There was something grounding about that small plastic card with my photo and title because it was proof that I existed in a space where my identity was not negotiable. I remember the first time someone called me by my full name in a professional setting and waited for my response with respect, and I realized how long it had been since I felt that simple acknowledgement without conditions. I moved through my days differently after that. I stopped explaining myself to people who did not ask questions in good faith. I stopped trying to fill silence with justification. I built routines that belonged only to me: morning coffee at the same corner cafe, evening walks through quiet streets, weekends spent organizing my life instead of defending it. One day, I received a package at my door with no return address. Inside was a small engraved nameplate that I had ordered for my office desk weeks earlier but had almost forgotten about. It read, "Emily Carter, Operations Coordinator." I placed it on my desk that evening and just stared at it for a long time, not because it was impressive, but because it was mine, untouched by anyone else's interpretation. That nameplate became something symbolic for me, not of status, but of ownership over my own identity. No one could redefine it unless I allowed them to. Slowly, I began to understand that rebuilding my life did not require anyone from my past to acknowledge it. It only required me to stop waiting for permission to exist fully. And as I stood in my apartment one quiet night, looking at that nameplate reflecting the soft light of my desk lamp, I realized I was no longer the person trying to be included in a story that had already excluded me. I was writing a different one. And yet, even as that new life took shape, there was still one night that refused to leave my mind, the night I stood in my own kitchen serving guests who did not know who I really was. The night everything began to unravel. And I finally understood that what happened there was not an ending, but the beginning of something I had not yet fully seen. After that night, my life did not return to what it was, because what broke inside my family never truly repaired itself. It only settled into distance. I stopped expecting my phone to ring with explanations or apologies that would finally make sense of everything. Instead, I learned what silence actually feels like when it is no longer something you fear, but something you choose. My days became steady in a way I had never experienced before, not perfect, not dramatic, just mine. I still thought about that dinner sometimes, about the way my name had been erased so easily in front of strangers, about how quickly a story can become a lie when enough people agree to repeat it. But I no longer felt the need to correct it in their world, because I had already stepped out of it. The final moment came months later when I received a message from my mother asking to meet at a cafe, something neutral, something public, something carefully worded so it did not sound like an apology. I went not because I expected change, but because I needed closure. She sat across from me, hands folded tightly, speaking softly about misunderstandings, about stress, about how things had been taken the wrong way that night. My brother arrived later, standing near the table instead of sitting, avoiding my eyes, repeating that no one meant harm, that it was all just confusion in front of guests. I listened without interrupting, letting their words exist fully without trying to reshape them. When there was a pause, I finally spoke, not with anger, but with clarity I had not had before. I told them that I understood what they chose to believe about me, and I was no longer asking to be included in it. I told them I would not attend events where my identity needed to be minimized in order for others to feel comfortable. I told them I was not angry anymore, but I was no longer available in the way I used to be. There was no argument after that, only a long silence that none of us rushed to fill. My mother looked down at her hands. My brother nodded once as if he had expected this outcome but did not know what to do with it. I left the cafe without looking back, and for the first time, I did not feel like I was leaving something unfinished. On my desk at home, my nameplate still sat where I had placed it, reflecting the soft evening light, a small object that carried more truth than anything ever said about me at that dinner table. It reminded me that identity is not something other people grant you. It is something you hold onto even when they refuse to recognize it. And maybe that is what I learned most from everything that happened, that peace is not always reconciliation. Sometimes it is distance. Sometimes it is choosing not to keep knocking on a door that was never meant to open for you. If you are listening to this and you have ever felt unseen in your own life, I want you to know this. You are not required to shrink yourself to fit inside someone else's version of you. You are allowed to step out of it. You are allowed to rebuild without permission. My name is Emily Carter. I am 32 years old, and if there is one thing I want you to take from my story, it is this: your worth does not change just because someone else refuses to see it. And for anyone still sitting in a room where they feel invisible, I hope you find the strength to choose yourself quietly without needing the room to agree. Thank you for staying with me through this story. Truly, it means more than I can say. If this resonated with you, feel free to share your thoughts or your own experience in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories like this, there are more waiting for you in the playlist, each one carrying a different truth, a different moment of realization, a different path toward healing, and maybe the next one will speak to something you have been carrying for a long time.